Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Andy Savage. We're happy to have both men running for the State Attorney General's office with us to talk about and debate the issues that are key to the top legal office in our state. Here with us in our studio is Democrat Matthew Richardson, and joining us by Skype from Columbia is Republican Alan Wilson. We'll get started with a one-minute opening statement from each of you. Alan, tell us about yourself and why you're running for the office of Attorney General.
Sure. Thank you for having me on your show. It's important for me to tell your viewers that as I've traveled the state of South Carolina, I've learned one thing. The people of South Carolina are looking for an attorney general who has prosecution experience working with law enforcement, and experience leading. In my career, I've had the opportunity as a combat veteran to lead soldiers in combat and make life and death executive decisions. As a prosecutor who's worked as an assistant solicitor and former assistant attorney general, and even at the federal law enforcement level with the DEA, I've had the opportunity to work crime scenes, to work with victims, victims advocates, local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, the judicial system, the criminal justice process, and helping make people's neighborhoods, schools, and communities safer. It's vitally important that this state have an attorney general who not only knows how to work in the courtroom, but knows how to lead from the front. And that's
Alan,
the kind of
thank you so much.
that
And Matthew, why do you think you are the very best person to make our Attorney General?
Thank you, Andy, for having us and giving us this opportunity to share with your viewers and the voters what they need to know about their attorney who to handle all the state's legal issues. I was born and raised in Barnwell and had a grandfather that grew peanuts and soybeans and taught me the values of hard work and common sense. And we need that in our next Attorney General. My other grandfather was Bubba Ness, one of the South Carolina's toughest judges, and he taught me the respect for the men and women on the front lines of law enforcement and also the importance of the rule of law. And I married my college sweetheart, and we have 3 young children, and I want for them what I want for all the children of South Carolina, and that is safe streets and safe neighborhoods, safe schools to learn in. And if we do that, then we'll have companies wanting to move here and certainly enjoy all the beautiful places and the wonderful environment that we have here. So my priorities will be protecting the public, prosecuting public fraud and corruption, and preserving our natural resources.
Well, gentlemen, let's get to some questions. You'll each have 1 minute to answer in the opening answer, and then your opponent will have a 30-second rebuttal time. And then there may be some follow-up questions for both of you, but our first question goes to Matthew Richardson. Matthew, our current Attorney General, Henry McMaster, joined with many, many other states fighting President Obama's health care legislation. Will you continue this fight? And if you do, how much taxpayer money are you willing to invest?
Well, thank you, Andy, for that question. This is an important issue that we face. We know the federal government cannot control everything we do in our lives, and we've got to have an answer on the individual mandate. The problem is, and the real difference between Alan and me, will be whether or not we use taxpayer dollars to elbow our way to the front and make a political issue out of this. I won't do that. And I think we've got plenty of other states that are carrying this burden for us, and we'll get the answer that we need of whether or not this is the right policy. I don't agree with the Obama health care plan, and so I think it's important that we recognize that the real distinction here is whether or not we'll make a political issue out of it or not.
Alan Wilson, 30 seconds.
Well, if I hear Matthew right, he's saying he's going to be a follower and not a leader for the people of South Carolina. I got that. What's important is that South Carolina do everything that it can to protect the constitutional rights, the state sovereignty, and the individual liberties of its citizens. This is an overreach of the federal government that is unprecedented and never happened before. And it could cost our state hundreds of millions of dollars in the long run if we don't do something now to stop it. So it's important that the next Attorney General be a leader in this. And by not doing something, that is a political decision when you agree with the administration.
Either Alan or Matthew, how much money are you willing to invest in this?
Well, the difference is that we know the current Attorney General spent over $700,000 elbowing his way to the front so we can make political hay out of this. And this issue has been too much of politics already. We don't need the emergency rooms to serve as our primary care physician for 30 million of South Carolina citizens, 30 million of U.S. citizens. And we've got to get a solution to that. But there are lots of states that are already prosecuting this case, and we can tag along with them. There are other circumstances, like Yucca Mountain and, of course, the water rights lawsuit, in which we should be leaders. And we've got to be smarter about our use of our tax dollars and not look out for the next step on our political career.
Alan?
Well, it's actually only cost the state about $4,300 thus far to join with.
Now, wait a second. Matthew says $700,000, and you say how much?
About $4,300.
Somebody's going to have to clarify that for our viewers.
Well, the state newspaper did the FOIA request. I always thought it wasn't very much money that they had spent, but we know how this issue can be a political football, and if you want to elbow your way to the front and make political
So I guess Matthew, what you're saying is you're willing to get out there and fight if it directly affects us and not other states, but where we can piggyback on with other attorney generals, that's the way you'd go.
And where we need to lead. We've got to be smarter with our tax dollars. We're wasting way too much tax dollars in this state, and we've got to make sure we focus on.
And Alan, you think the issue is so important that you want to lead the way?
Well, first off, we already are working with 20 other states' attorney generals. So, Matthew's, saying he wants to be a follower. I'm saying I want to be a leader, but we're already working with 19 other states' attorneys general. The question is and Matthew is a good guy. I like him a lot. But he's the Democratic National Committeeman for his state's party, and he's supportive of this administration. I will support this administration when it's right, but right now it is wrong, and you've got to have the courage to stand up and take a stand for things like this overexpansive health care bill.
Our next question goes to Alan Wilson. Alan, what is your position on tort reform, and how can the Attorney General's office bring about the changes that you deem necessary?
Well, I supported Senate Bill 350 that failed at the 11th hour last session in our General Assembly. I thought that was a good compromise. Tort reform in general does not affect our office except probably with the Private Attorney Retention Sunshine Act, which I support. I believe that that was a fair compromise in how the Attorney General contracts with outside attorneys when they hire folks to do business on behalf of the state.
Matthew, what would you do?
Well, I think the scales of justice have to be balanced. And, there are many changes that need to be made. We need to protect the rights of people to an appeal, and we need to make stiffer penalties for frivolous lawsuits and proceedings. But I value the right to trial by jury that was preserved by our founding fathers. And I simply trust 12 citizens of South Carolina, of any county in South Carolina, more than I trust the changes in Congress or the General Assembly to deem necessary.
Alan, you touched on this and you talked about outside counsel for the Attorney General's office. With all the attorneys that you have as your assistants there, why does the Attorney General go outside, and how much taxpayer money goes into these private attorneys' pockets?
Well, first off, you got to understand that there are not that many people in the civil division of the Attorney General's office. 70 to 80% of the attorneys at the Attorney General's office work in the criminal section. Now, that doesn't diminish the role that the civil attorneys play. They certainly have a very prolific impact on our state. But when we're involving in complex litigation that involves thousands of hours of man hours of work, that we simply don't have the bodies to put that much time in it. And a lot of firms out there have specialized areas of practice where they are subject matter experts.
Can you tell the public how much funding you're willing to invest in private attorneys, and how do you pick those attorneys?
Well, you got to understand, a lot of times when you can contract with these law firms, they are on contingent basis, and they assume all the risk and do all the work, and whatever they win on behalf of our state on legitimate lawsuits, on only legitimate lawsuits, when they win an award, they'll get a percentage of that. If they don't win the award,
you're satisfied with the status quo?
No, we're wasted way too many tax dollars on this. We're spending over $13 million a year in hiring private attorneys just to defend the state. We've got to do a much better job for our taxpayers. If we have to hire outside counsel, I think we ought to follow 3 simple steps. One is we ought to do it in-house if we can. That's the most efficient way. If we can't, we ought to partner with other attorneys general like we do on the health care lawsuit so we don't expend a lot of money. And then if we need to, we hire the best lawyer at the best price.
And no politics involved.
Actually,
That's
Andy,
right.
Matthew is incorrect and wrong on that. The total budget of the Attorney General's office last year, I believe, was a total of $15 million. That's for everything. You know, our appropriations from the General Assembly are only down to about 4.7 or $4.6 million this past year. So, you know, we're not spending that much money. These firms work on a contingent contract basis, and so that's actually incorrect information.
I'd like to correct that. Actually, Alan, it's not. It's true in the Attorney General's budget there's only about $2 million going to pay outside lawyers to defend the state. But then the Insurance Reserve Fund, our tax dollars are about $11 million more hiring outside attorneys, a lot of whom are Republican contributors and supporters.
Well, let's leave the lawyers alone for a minute now. One of our viewers has emailed us when they heard you both coming on, and he said he hopes the Attorney General's office can get back to the image it had when my former boss, Dan McLeod, ran the office. Who do you think has been our state's best Attorney General since Dan McLeod, and why?
Well, Dan McLeod was definitely the model for us. I mean, it cannot be about politics. It's got to be about protecting the people of South Carolina from anything that threatens them, whether it be internet or sexual predators targeting our children, financial scams or physical abuse of our seniors, career politicians that are abusing our public trust, or anyone who's polluting our environment. And that's why I won't run for any other office while I'm Attorney General. That's what Dan McLeod did, and that's what the people deserve.
Well, Dan McLeod not only didn't run for any office when he was Attorney General, that's the only office he ever ran for. Are you willing to commit to that today?
As Attorney General, I won't run for any other office because you cannot have a conflict of interest in your client. And if I choose to pursue some other interest at all, I owe it to my client, the people of South Carolina, to get them another attorney. But I'm 100% committed to be the Attorney General, and that's all I'll do.
Alan Wilson, who would you rank as our top Attorney General since Dan McLeod?
Well, first off, when I first started running over a year ago, and I put a lot of thought into what kind of Attorney General I want to be, you know, Dan McLeod was the first one that popped to mind. Although he predates Matthew and me, I hear people from both parties speak so fondly of him. But I don't want to diminish the service of the other attorneys general that have served our state, both Mr. Medlock, Mr. Condon, and Mr. McMaster. People are always quick to, you know, pick them apart, you know, and second-guess decisions that they made or things that they did. But each of these men brought something valuable and important to the office of the Attorney General. You know, Mr. Medlock is the father of the modern state grand jury. You know, Mr. Condon's work with violence against women, and obviously Mr. McMaster's pro bono CDV program, and also his work with internet crimes against children. Each of these men have made that office better in some way, and I think that, you know, you can borrow from each of these men, going back to Mr. McLeod, and kind of,
Alan,
you know,
are you willing to
Attorney
commit
General.
to keep your term as Attorney General, whatever you're elected for, you'll fulfill that obligation to the end?
Absolutely.
Well, more with the Attorney General candidates Matthew Richardson and Alan Wilson right after this. You're watching The Savage Report on Comcast C2. We're all local, all the time.